Yay, it is live. Well, hello everyone. Hope you are doing very, very well. I'm excited for this live stream. It's been a year in the making, a little bit more than a year now. And so I'm excited to be doing this. We have with us today...
Polyglot Progress!
Polyglot Progress.
Yes, Polyglot Progress. So we have Matt, and then do you go by Abigail or Abby, or both?
Either one's fine. I usually say Abigail, but if you call me Abby, it's also fine.
Okay, cool. So basically, I guess tell us a little bit more about Polyglot Progress. What is that?
Well, basically, it started in 2015.
16.
No, well, I'm talking about the germ of the idea. When, why we started it. Because we went to the Polyglot conference in New York City before we had really even learned a language. Like, we learned Esperanto, and I learned a little bit of French, you learned a little bit of German, and then we decided to go to this language conference, and we were kind of getting into the whole just reaching into the polyglot scene on the internet, and then we went to the conference and it was game over. We had to do this, and it's actually really funny because someone did an interview with us as just people going to the conference, and now we make videos online.
That ended up going anywhere, but Gareth Hopkins technically interviewed us
for
a video that he was making about the Polyglot conference. And so I don't know if that's anywhere on the internet, but if it is, there's little tiny Matt and Abigail answering questions about what it's like to be there.
But yeah, it was cool. We got to meet people like Benny Lewis, Richard Simcott, Tim Donor, hear them speak and just give their talks, and that was fantastic. That's what we got to see Tim's talk on the Indo-European Connection live, which but it was fantastic, and just I'd say that was really where it started for us. And then later in 2016, it became got started as a school project for me of a community service type, educational resource type thing, and then we've just been growing it ever since.
Yeah, we've had the idea before that, though. It was you kind of put it as your school project because
I was we can do this fun thing we want to do and have it be school credit.
Yeah. So basically, the general idea behind Polyglot Progress is us working towards becoming polyglots, and less so we are polyglots already. It's more so our own progress within languages we're learning. And we also do have a podcast where we share our own experiences and tips and things. But the general idea behind it originally was just to kind of document our own learning and
series.
Have diaries of us kind of practicing our languages. So now it's kind of that, and it's also us talking about other things, because also, I mean, we are students. I know you'd asked, I guess, possibly not before we were live. Our jobs, we're both in university right now. I'm in my third year, and one of my majors is French. So we've kind of started to incorporate things like that as well.
Where are you studying?
I'm studying in New York.
Yeah, we're both at the same school. It's just a state school in New York, 40 minutes out of the city. But it doesn't have the biggest language program, so it's a struggle here to stay involved with our languages and also pursuing our majors at the same time. That's been my bigger struggle, being a college student and doing this. It's my career path of the majors and my interests don't totally align, but I try to overlap them where I can.
Well, I guess you're lucky, and you are lucky in that sense, though, because you are in New York, which is obviously a major city. And it's funny because often I'll get DMs or messages or emails from people who will say things like, wow, I wish I was in a big city because I would at least have the opportunity to meet someone who is learning said language or who speaks said language. There's even there's one person on my Instagram I was talking with not that long ago who's from a small city, or it's either a large town or a small city. I don't remember, one of the two. And she just doesn't there's just not that many people in the city that that she even has the potential to talk to. In New York, I don't know what the population is, but even just the population of the city gives you way more at-bats, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, since we're right outside of the city, it's a little harder. But it's definitely even easier for me. I'm from a really small town originally, so there's definitely a bit more diversity even where we are right now. And then it's easy enough to go into the city and then find more people to practice with and things like that.
I think we've talked about it on here, but we play a game whenever we're in the city or like on the subway where like if we hear someone speaking in a language, we kind of just lock eyes with each other and try to guess what it is, which is probably eavesdropping, but it's very fun and it's well intentioned. It's not with any like malice there, but
has that ever led to any weird scenarios? Or any awkward encounters of people going, why are you looking at us? Why are you...
No, surprisingly.
Yeah, surprisingly not, actually.
I mean, well, in my hometown, which is on Long Island, I worked this summer as a cashier in this, at a supermarket, and I actually had so many customers that it totally like changed my outlook of where I'm from in terms of like the diversity of where I live. Like I thought it was only English and Spanish, but I had customers who I spoke in French with. I had Italian customers. I had languages I didn't recognize, and like people that were like on FaceTime with their sister and were just speaking so loudly in this language, and I wanted to be like, what is that? Like it sounded like Czech or Croatian, and I was like, I want to know what it is. But like people right in my neighborhood who speak this, and it totally changed my idea of who lives where, you know?
Yeah, totally. It's funny because, so for me, like I've had a similar experience, but in a slightly different way. So I live in Calgary, which is in Canada. I was telling you guys before we went live, and Calgary is a very multicultural city. Like we have people from China and Japan and South Korea and, you know, France and Germany and Mexico and like, so, you know, USA, America, so many different cultural backgrounds, countries. And so it's funny because we will often say, in Calgary, people often say things like, oh, we are so multicultural, which is absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is really interesting, though, is that despite how multicultural we are multicultural with certain cultures, meaning we have a lot of a certain number of cultures, but we don't have a lot, you know, for example, we don't have, from my experience anyway, a huge Turkish population, for example. We don't have this. There's a lot of countries where we just don't have a lot of people from those countries. And it's one of those things, and I don't know if what you guys think of it, but I feel like when you live in a large city that is quite multicultural, it's funny how sometimes I find that we default into thinking we have everything. Oh, we have all cultures, all foods. But we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I even, like, I studied Bulgarian intensively for a summer, and it was with Ad1, and when I did Ad1, part of the, like, signing up for it was you were supposed to set kind of, like, a reward almost if you complete the challenge, and also kind of like a anti-reward, I guess, if you don't complete it. And so I was trying to find, like, a Bulgarian, like, bookstore or something like that to, like, have that be my reward. Like, oh, I'll, like, get a book from this Bulgarian bookstore, or I'll, like, go to a Bulgarian restaurant, or, like, something related to Bulgaria. And there was nothing in New York City, which is, like, because I figured at least there, like, there wouldn't be anything in the town I'm from, but there must at least be something in New York City, and there just isn't.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting how much multiculturalism, or like the idea of being multicultural, is kind of actually sanctioned by what other people are like okay with, you know? Like it's very strange in a city, at least, that, like, you know, I've also noticed that like cultures, at least in a city like New York, do get separated and like what's the word, like a gluttonate in one area, or like, and it kind of leads to like you think it's very like evenly distributed, but it's very separated, it feels like, actually. As in,
like, certain parts of the city have all, like, a certain part of the city would have a certain cultural group in that sense?
Yeah, and I mean, it's New York City is a very interesting example, because you can go to places like Queens or like on the border of New Jersey, and you can see signs and stores all in like Korean or Mandarin, and like it's fantastic. I remember driving from Philadelphia back to Long Island, and we passed a sign, a whole mall and like shopping center that had signs in Korean, and I got so excited because I've never seen that before, and it was just like the idea of seeing another language like on display, on like being used, because the people here speak that. It was a really cool moment. And like I think the same thing happens in Queens. You'll see a lot more signs in Chinese, a lot more.
Well, there's actually, have you seen that? There's like a map of like the linguistic neighborhoods of Queens
and Brooklyn.
Yeah, because it's so concentrated in like regions, so you can. It's like a really interesting map that you can look up after this, but it's like basically it like blocks out where you could find each language,
it's
or
so
like,
cool.
And they're almost sort of grouped by families in some senses too, like language families. And in some places they're not. Like you'll have like there's like a Haitian Creole neighborhood next to like something totally different. Like it could be like a Korean neighborhood, but they're very interestingly like grouped into.
It's cool to see how where people settled and where the languages sit now. It's really neat.
So in New York, then, since it is so multicultural, I guess I'm wondering, is there a culture of people wanting to learn other languages or learn more about other languages or learn more about other cultures? Is that like a thing?
You know, I honestly don't know, just because my experience in the city itself has been pretty limited. I lived in the city for about 4 weeks this summer, and that's really the most I've lived in the city since we're right outside of it. But I don't really know. I'd actually be interested to know that as well.
I would as well. I think it's difficult to say because of it being like the heart of commercialism in the U.S. and like just advertising. Like I don't know if there have ever been. Actually, there may be like signs in different languages in Times Square. Like I'd be interested in that because like I just think.
I think I actually saw one while I was there this summer. I think there was one. I want to say it was in Mandarin.
Because I think I know the one you're talking about. It's like white, black font.
I don't know. I think this was for like a Chinese radio station that was now like broadcasting in the United States. So.
But I'd be very interested in that because I worry that like with the industry in New York that like it very much emphasizes on English. I think nowadays, hopefully, we're moving away from that. But like, there is that English being like, I saw some article the other day that was like English as a behemoth of language, and just like it. I saw like the diagram was like it holding the earth and being like mine.
Well, it's such a practical language to know. It's so. It's kind of like you know, like when I heard this. I don't know if it's true, and maybe you guys know more about it than I do. But if you look, for example, at like Esperanto, right?
Yeah.
From what I've heard, and if I'm incorrect, please let me know. But from what I've heard, the original purpose of Esperanto was to have like an international language, so a language where everyone can speak it. So if you're going about to different countries, different cultures, you always have something in common.
Yeah.
Is that true? Let's start there. Is that true, or am I like off base?
Secondary language. Okay. So like it wasn't meant to replace your native language, but it was meant for everyone to learn as like we all can connect to each other with this like linguistic bridge.
Yeah, and it's funny because, and again, I'm not educated on the topic, and if you guys know more, then please educate me. But it is interesting to me to see that when I first heard that, I found, isn't that basically what English is already? Like English, essentially, if you go. I remember, for example, like if we go downtown Calgary, there's an office where I run a lot of my language classes from. And on certain days of the week, there's the owner of the office who hosts these English practice events on other days of the week where I'm not there. And they're from different countries. The students who come, they're from Korea and Mexico, and they're from so many different places. And it's interesting because when they're in the same room, they don't have a language in common. And so they actually, even if their English is really poor, that is the only means they can actually use to communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting how that's kind of like, it's kind of flipped on its head, and like that's become the answer to it. Like I know there's been a push lately, I think, for regional variants of standard English to be recognized as their own dialect or their own language of English. Like, I don't know where, but I remember reading something of like there are so many now dialectical varieties of English that like they want recognition as being proper.
And
as in, like, if you're from said region of England, you speak a different version of English? Like, oh, we have the London English. We have the,
no, I mean more so like other countries where English isn't the native language. Like I'd say like India, where like so many people speak it that like it's become essentially a regional language there.
I mean, technically, I don't know exactly how many there, but I think it's 6 official dialects of English, and one of them is Singapore English.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's like American English, Canadian English,
Singapore, that's so cool.
British English, Australian English, Singapore English, and then there's like one other one. I don't remember what it is. It could be like.
Because I remember people saying like they were trying to write grammars of these new Englishes.
Yeah.
Which is, it's really neat that like that's a thing we're doing, but like it's also kind of scary because it's like, is it like the problem arises of like, is it taking away people's native languages? And like that's why Esperanto posed itself as like an answer to this, because it was like, no, still use your native language, just learn this easier second one for when you travel and like talk to other people. And I worry that like just the way English is being pushed, that it's like viewed as such a necessity that like you can't get by without it, and people like push their own language out of the way. Like, I hope that's not the case, but I fear that it is.
And it does, and it happens, especially where you're talking about it being English being pushed out of the way. It's kind of like when people immigrate to America, to Canada, to any country really. You know, any country. Someone leaves their home country, goes to another country. It is, and again, in my experience, from what I've seen, very common for families to, especially with their children, to use the country they've immigrated to's language. So, for example, if they went from India to America or India to Canada or whatever, instead of using Hindi at home or Punjabi or whatever, they now use English with their kids because they want to help, quote unquote, help their children.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And the weird thing is that the kids are going to learn English anyway. They don't have a choice. They're going to learn at school. They have to. And I don't know the research behind it, but I've heard people talk about it who know the research behind it. And I've heard people talk about how, and it makes sense to me, how if you don't have a solid grasp of your mother tongue, whatever your first language is, it is difficult, and it makes it way harder to pick up another language.
I've heard this too, yeah. It kind of uses that base grammar off which to base other things, you know?
Totally, yeah. It's even like I work with a guy right now, actually many people, not even just one. I've worked with many people who, when I'm running classes and teaching people, it's so interesting to see that if I have, let's say, 3 adults in a class, 2 adults are quite eloquent with their English, like they have a strong level, they really know big words, their vocabulary is high, they do speak with a proper grammar, let's say. And then you have person number 3, who obviously speaks English fluently, no issues, but they don't have as much of a grammar. Let's say they've never really read many books. They don't actually know their mother tongue to the same depth as perhaps the other 2 people. It is interesting to see how they struggle more. I've noticed that.
I feel like I'd love to read the research on this, because like there was my elementary school was a place that implemented, after I'd left there, implemented a program where the students were being taught English. English was a language of instruction. Apart from, I think, 2 hours a week, they would introduce Spanish and do all the instruction in Spanish. And they actually had the statistics that said that once these kids reached middle school, where like, you know, your classes are in English, but then you have Spanish elective or French or German, that no matter what language these kids went to, they were able to perform better than anybody before them. And yet they cut the program because they weren't being taught enough English, they said. But it's interesting because it gave the people whose parents at home are speaking Spanish to them, it gave them more Spanish to learn in school rather than English, where like it kind of like, I know my neighbors came from Ecuador and would speak English to us and then go home and speak Spanish with their parents, and would have to translate between our families. And like they were not even 12, like, and they were having to be like an interpreter. And it's like, and so this is the point where like I think it's a good idea to have programs that like, at least in the US, do focus on languages like Spanish, where like we have such a use for it, a need of like a communal need to come together and speak 2 languages mutually intelligibly. But even for the kids who it's helping, like you'll grow up with a comfortable foundation in the two languages rather than English drowning out your mother tongue, which I think is such a problem, at least here and probably in Canada too. How is the language instruction in Canada compared to the US in like grade school?
Do you mean how do they teach it? Like how do they teach language, or do you mean how? Like what do you mean exactly?
I think probably like, is it offered even? Because I know for us, it's like not even offered until you get to a higher level.
Yeah.
Right? Was that a question?
And just like, do people enjoy it? Is it viewed as a hassle like it is in the US? Is it seen as not as important as other classes? Because I know that's a problem. The problem language teachers here face is that their classes don't get treated as important as like history and English and math. And so they're kind of viewed as subsidiary to everything else, and thus defunded and not given importance.
Yeah, I can speak from experience. So we have different types of schools. So for example, we have immersion schools because Canada does have 2 official languages. We have English and French.
Yeah.
And so we do have many French immersion schools where you take, excuse me, you take all of your core classes in French. So for example, math is in French, English is not in French. math is in French. History, geography is in French. Science is in French up until your freshman year of high school, and then it switches back to English. What else is in French? Anyway, there's a list. Oh, French classes obviously in French. You have like a French grammar, reading class, speaking, etc. There might be more, but those are essentially you have a bunch of classes that are taught in French if you are in a French immersion school. If you are not in a French immersion school, if I am not mistaken, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I am reasonably sure that you will take like a French class at school, but it's not, it's not like a bilingual education or anything like that. And I also know that it will depend on where you are. So for example, in Ontario, if you go further east, the closer you get to Quebec, which is where they speak French in Canada, it becomes, I guess you could say, more, I guess you might feel the importance more. Because Quebec's right now, if you're in Ontario or something, Quebec is literally right next door, versus I'm out west, where if I go to Quebec and I speak French, let's start here, it's a 4-hour flight, so it's it's a decent flight, 3.5, 4-hour flight. And so like when I speak in French in Quebec, they go, oh, where are you from? And I go, I'm from Calgary. And they go, wait, you guys speak, like literally almost 100% of the time, people go, you guys speak French out there? People speak French? And then you have to explain that, yeah, some people do. We don't on a day-to-day basis. But so, I think it depends on the school. Like if you're in an immersion school, then obviously no, it's viewed pretty seriously because you're in an immersion school. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a general answer to something we could probably get really deep into.
Really interesting.
Yeah, we do have immersion schools here, but they're only private schools, I think.
And also, I know, like, I'd have friends in, you go, I think, as you're younger, like in elementary school, I'd have friends who would go to, like, Chinese school after school to, like, learn the language. Or there was a friend who went to a French school, but, like, I have no idea where these are. Apparently, there's also a German school nearby, and I've never heard of this.
See, we didn't have it. We only had, the only one near me that was like that was Hebrew school, and it was people who were gonna, who were like being raised with the synagogue, and like their synagogue offered, instead of like where a Catholic school like child would go to like Sunday school, they just went to Hebrew school.
Gotcha.
But we didn't have any other like fun language school things.
Yeah, they sound fun, but everyone always described it as
everyone always hated it. I just meant like
here they're not. Generally speaking, people don't necessarily enjoy being in like an immersion program, or they generally, I mean, and it's not everyone, and maybe it's different per city, but for people I've seen, people I've met, generally I find people don't necessarily enjoy their language classes.
Yeah, it's very strange, and I think it's due to the oversaturation of English here and in Canada. But like, I wish the United States does this weird thing of not having an official language, and I just feel like it's not the solution anymore. Like, yeah, it was a cool idea to have when they decided that, but like, I don't know. I think we need to give some languages like some help, you know, and like because by having no official language, we're able to just get by with doing everything in English, and this avoids giving people the services they need in, say, Spanish.
Or, wait, America doesn't have an official language?
No, it's
seriously
de facto English, but on record there's no language, and it's
no way.
Yeah.
I'm gonna Google this.
Yeah, please.
I had no idea.
But like, I think it was supposed to be this thing of like, well, all languages are spoken here, but like, it's come to just be English, and we just pretend there's no official language, which is strange.
Yeah. I mean, just a quick Google search. I mean, Wikipedia. Let's see what grain of salt. Wikipedia says there's no official language at the U.S. federal level.
Yeah.
Apparently, 32 states, they have what's called an English-only movement.
Oh, whoa.
I don't know what that means. And again, this is Wikipedia. I have no idea. Yeah. It says it could be so off base. CNN.com says that English is not the official language of the United States. Like, oh, that's so... I'm going to read about this more in depth after, but I had no idea that you didn't have an official language.
It's really interesting, though, because like Matt was saying, basically all the like signs here and things are just in English, though. So it's like we kind of signs. Like by default, English is the official language, and I think like anyone who you'd ask would guess that English is the official language.
I would guess States, if I didn't know this.
Technically, there is none.
Yeah.
So, how does the government operate? Like, I know, again, I'm assuming it's obviously done in English because obviously, but like, what's the rules around it then?
I guess everyone just uses English, but I don't know what would happen if we were to have. I guess it's just that we haven't elected anyone in who's been like a Spanish-only speaker or only speaks a different language. So
the problem is that it's a systematic problem if they wouldn't get elected due to what everyone's used to, but. Like exactly, like that would be the solution. Yeah. Like honestly, the closest we have to that is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's running, and she has a bilingual platform of Spanish and English, and like she actually appeals to the Spanish-speaking populace.
Yeah. So I don't know what would happen if we actually had some elected officials that didn't speak the same language.
It would be funny though, because imagine it's such a far out scenario, but I weirdly I don't even know what percentage of people in the USA. I don't know what percentage of people are from let's say Mexican roots or Latino roots or whatnot. Like it would be very interesting to see if there's a candidate who ran literally a Spanish only platform. They did Spanish only. They appealed to hey, there's 28% or 35% of the population that speaks Spanish. We're gonna get all those votes. Like that would be. I don't think it'll happen. Maybe if it does, then that'd be really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because it's kind of happening now. There's this woman running for Congress named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she's like the first person I know of who's running like a bilingual campaign and like is actually giving speeches, I believe, in Spanish and like advertising in Spanish and like appeals to that demographic and like also appeals to the English-speaking populace because. I guess, I mean, it's also in English, but like, it's neat to see it actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so crazy. It's such a mind.
Yeah.
Huh.
It's pretty. I don't think it's the answer anymore. It's kind of problematic because, like, I mean, take a country like South Africa that has, I believe, 5 national languages. I can't name them, but. Like 3 or 5, and like legally, all government services have to be offered to you in all of these languages. So that way you appeal to, I'd say, nearly everyone. And like, but the problem is, does everyone get the services they need in these languages? But like, we just get away with that here because we say there's no official language, so you can't blame us for only using English. And it's like, this is just avoiding the problem, guys.
Well, it's an interesting debate. And it's actually, I'm curious to see where you stand. I think not anyone, most people who are interested in languages, I find, again, in my experience, that there's almost like an inherent belief. I don't know why this is on my finger. There's an inherent belief. There's an inherent belief that multiculturalism or multilingualism, excuse me, multilingualism is a positive thing, and we should have more languages. We should preserve languages. If a language is going extinct, we should revive the language. There's a lot of conversation around that, and generally speaking, in my experience, I find that there are many people who are interested in languages who have beliefs like this. I think there's an interesting debate to be had around if that's actually really an important thing or not. Is multilingualism actually important? Yes, we like it. So for us, sure. Yeah. But for population as a whole, is it? I don't know.
That raises a very interesting question of like what actual social function does it provide? I mean, I feel like I've been talking a lot, so if you want to jump in, please.
I mean, my answer, I guess, would be that, like, I get the point of, like, should we be protecting all of the languages because, like, then we can't all speak to each other, but I think the answer to that would be, like, having, like, I guess if we're talking, like, an ideal world, like, it would be having everyone be bilingual with, like, their language and then some, like, universal language, I guess, whether that's English or Esperanto or something else entirely. Because I think then if we were to let, like, certain languages go extinct and not work on preserving them and stuff just for the fact of allowing everyone to communicate, then you get into the dangerous territory of, like, which ones do we protect and, like, whose native language gets to be considered, like, important or special enough to be, like, preserved and protected and things.
Yes.
So I'd say, like, ideally what would happen is, like, everything gets to be preserved, but then, like, the way that we are all able to stay in contact with each other would be through some, like, other form of communication.
That's interesting, because I think what's at the base of the problem is education about each other's languages and about each other's cultures. Because when you don't learn about something, I think there's an inherent fear towards it and, like, a push against it. But when like I found that through learning languages from, like, a youngish age of, like, middle school, I became very open to just any culture that spoke a different language. But I found that, like, people who don't, or at least I've observed that, like, people who aren't exposed to other languages and then encounter them are kind of, like, off-put and, like, feel like an inherent divide and a difference there. But it's like, it's that whole thing of, like, embracing difference rather than, like, putting a wall between you two. It's like, actually, we should talk about it and, like, enjoy each other for that. And, like, but in terms of, like, allowing languages to die, like, I mean, it's a natural process, but I mean, I'm afraid it leads to, like, this type of, like, I'm gonna totally I doubt this is a term, but, like, the linguistic Darwinism of, like, the strongest language survives, and all of that's kind of been historically predictated of, like, well, right now it's English and, like, nothing's gonna, if we just keep going at that rate, English is gonna kill everything else, wherever it's dominant right now. And so that's why I think there are why we should support preservation efforts and, like, be aware of other languages and the importance of these languages to other people. And, like, it doesn't need to be important to you, but it can be important to someone else. And, like, that's, I think, at the heart of it. Who knows?
Yeah, and I think it's funny because that there are less languages now than there used to be.
Yeah, and they're decreasing rapidly. Like,
but here's the thing: at the same time, and I'm literally just playing devil's advocate for fun, because it creates good conversation. But I think there's an argument not an argument, but I think it would be interesting to see if there's a connection between how right now there's less languages, but there's also way more intercultural communication. And I don't mean on a political level, because on a political level, I think there's a fair argument to be made that people are quite closed in certain ways, and again, I'm not an expert on politics, but often it seems like there's more barriers. But on a human level, there's way more. Like, it's easy to be able to talk to someone in Mexico now because of technology, because people do speak English, because other people do learn other languages now. And it's not like, oh, I live in X tribe, and so I learn my tribal language. And
I'm going to play devil's advocate to the devil's advocate.
Go for it.
Is it creating a monoculture rather than multiculturalism? Are we creating, like, a universal monoculture throughout the internet, like, almost, or, like, throughout all of this interaction?
Wouldn't that be a good thing?
Was it what?
Wouldn't that be a good thing?
A monoculture?
Sure.
The devil's advocate to the devil's advocate to the devil's advocate.
Like, what if?
Yeah.
And now we're going to really crazy territory.
Yeah.
But what if we went into like a Star Wars world or Star Trek, depending on which side of the coin you're on, where there's like different planets and like it's not like right now we view our country, our world, and we go, oh, it's split up into countries. What if we went, okay, here's the galaxy.
This
we have Earth.
Yeah.
Earth is like one country in the galaxy. Like it would be.
Yeah. I see what you
know
mean.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is so.
I guess then again, though,
we're having fun now, but
much like what language becomes our universal language, it again goes into dangerous territory of like what customs and cultural things do we keep?
Yeah.
Because I guess technically that was also like almost Hitler's platform of like, what if we were all the same?
Yeah.
So like, I guess if you're making a monoculture, like, I mean, everyone like dresses different ways and eats certain foods traditionally, and like celebrates different like holidays and religions and stuff. So then it's like, what holidays and religions and traditional dress and things do we keep in this monoculture, and what are we gonna get rid of?
Yeah, that's scary.
It would be a type of Darwinism in certain ways.
Yeah.
Like, you look at, like, I think I've seen a stand-up comedian who talks about this. I forget who it was. If you guys know, if someone in the chat knows, or if you guys know, let me know. But there's a comedian who talks about how Christianity won overall, and the joke he's making, and it's a joke, but there's a certain level of truth behind it. Is like, what's the date today?
Yeah.
Because we all have agreed upon this calendar.
Yeah.
What the Gregorian calendar, isn't it?
Yeah.
Gregorian, yeah.
Because it's based on like a not a saint. Wasn't it like a Pope Gregory or something who made it?
I think that sounds correct. I don't know for sure, but I think it is after a Pope.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Like, and it's crazy because that just kind of. So here we go again, using Wikipedia as a source. I don't know how reliable this is, but the Gregorian calendar was reformed to the Julian calendar. It was instituted in 1582 by Pope Gregory the 13th, after whom the calendar was named by papal bull. Oh, that's not English. Okay. And I heard on a podcast, again, I don't know if it's true, but I heard on a podcast that is because the Julian calendar was inaccurate. It was off every year. They kept losing, like it wasn't correct. It wasn't as accurate as it could be. They lost like 10 days a year or something.
Yeah, I think I actually knew that because I think we moved, that was when we moved the New Year as well. Because I believe New Year's used to be celebrated, I want to say July after Julian, something like that. It was something like that where New Year's was technically like a completely different day. And like we shifted it when we moved to the Gregorian calendar because of this whole like totally off thing that we had.
That's neat.
So anyway, it's just, if we did go to monolingualism, monoculturalism, and it would probably happen how historically it's happened, where someone happens to win it. They win. They're the dominant culture, and then eventually we adapt, and then things change. And
yeah, I feel like almost out of that you'd have sub factions that would then go backwards, and like it would divide. You know, like everything would kind of agglutinating and then go the other way.
Have you guys read? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say, have you read the book series, the Ender's Game book series? Any of the books on?
I've read the first two. Yeah.
So which two?
Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead.
Okay, cool. So Abigail, have you read those?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So here's a very quick summary of the book without giving any spoilers. Essentially, there's I'm bad at giving book summaries, but basically it's like, well, in the future, we were invaded by an alien planet, and now we're trying to attack them before they attack us again. Or we're trying to attack them because they're going to attack us again, and there's a threat around these aliens. There's a big war, and there's a lot of consequences because of that intergalactic war, and it's just interesting kind of book. And Speaker for the Dead is a really interesting book where it's kind of the aftermath of that. And what I find really interesting about Speaker for the Dead particularly is the whole, I forget exactly, there's like the 4 categories of aliens. Do you remember that? Do you remember it's like, there's like Varelse, where it's like, you can't communicate and one is a threat to the other or something. How does it work? Do you remember how it is?
No, I know what you're talking about. It's like, but it is based on communication and then intelligence, and it goes up until it's like on a level that we don't understand, right? Is that
it? It's like essentially there's, I don't remember what the categories are, but there's like 4 or 5 categories you have. And there's like one where it's like, you are the same race and you can communicate, you have language in common, you have cultures in common, your DNA is similar, and they have a bunch of criteria. You have one step further where it's, you're clearly alien, they're clearly different, they're from a different planet, but you can communicate and you can work together and you don't have to fight because you can talk, essentially. There's another level, and there's a 4th level where they're so alien that we cannot find any way to communicate. They are threatening us, and so we must destroy them. And from
it's on the list, by the way.
What did you? What's the list?
It's the Utlaning, the Fremling, the Ramen, and Varelsa.
Nice. And is there definitions there that are not super duper long? Or
well, the Varelsa is the one I think you were talking about, which is true aliens. They may or may not be sentient beings, but are so foreign that no meaningful communication is possible with the subject, which is that's crazy. And Ramen is like humans.
And so that's the thing, right? Where it's interesting. I thought it was an interesting book, obviously, because I like fantasy books. But even just the communication aspect, and communication is such a huge theme in both Ender's Game, Speaker for the Dead, those 2 specifically. It's such a huge, language and communication is such a huge theme in those books. And what I like about them, actually, anyone watching this, I highly recommend it, because I think you guys will like it if you like fantasy and if you like language. Because the whole communication side is, it has a very good, it has a very good representation of what are the ramifications of not having good communication and what are the positive things of having good communication.
And
I don't want to give any spoilers, but like, if you think, so I guess, Matt, you'll know this, but like the end of Ender's Game, right? Like that's a huge miscommunication, essentially.
Absolutely. And like that miscommunication is what allows the rest of the series to happen, but it's like the chaos of miscommunication is the entire thing. And it's terrifying, but it's really well written. I enjoyed those books immensely.
Amazing book. Yeah, it's amazing. It's an epic book. But how long are we going here? I'm gonna see. We could wrap up in like maybe 5-10 minutes. So I want to go back to something. So Abby, you said you're from a small town, or Abigail, you said you're from a small town? Where are you from?
So I'm actually originally from Washington, D.C. But then my family moved when I was probably like 10 or so. We moved to Connecticut. So I'm from Connecticut on the Massachusetts border.
Okay, got it. What's like the population?
So it's like 30,000 people. So it's not like as tiny as it could be, but it's pretty small comparatively to other towns.
And so I'm assuming it's not super multicultural.
No, not at all.
So go ahead.
The best way to describe it is, have you ever watched Parks and Rec?
I've seen enough to probably understand whatever reference you're gonna make.
Yeah. Well, there's a town in Parks and Rec that is like the town that everyone like in the Parks and Rec department hates, and like everyone from that town hates because they're like really snobby
it's like
white
the
people.
Antithesis of Pawnee.
Yeah. So they're like these really snobby white people, and that town is based on the town I'm from. So.
I love when you use that as like an introduction of where you're from.
It sums it all up.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
So the opposite of multicultural.
So I'm curious, did you have any interest in languages before, like even when you're in a very monolingual environment?
Yeah, I don't know, I've always had like an interest in languages since I was little, and when I did live in DC, I had sort of like immersion Spanish lessons in our classes starting in, I think it was 1st grade. So starting at a pretty young age, they had us doing kind of immersion Spanish, and then I moved and I obviously wasn't able to continue that because my new school did not have Spanish, and so we like didn't have any languages. But I, even as a kid, like one summer I was like 9 or 10 or something like that, and I took out those like muzzy VHS tapes so I could teach myself Italian over a summer. So like from that time, like I was trying to kind of teach myself other languages, and I never was really able to stick with one or like really learn it, just probably because I was like a 10-year-old trying to teach myself a language on my own and didn't really know how to go about that yet. But I definitely had an interest in language learning even in like a monolingual environment. And I think it took till I was like an older teenager to be able to successfully learn something on my own. Partially just because I think at that age as like a younger kid, I didn't have like the study skills even to properly be able to learn a language without someone helping me along the way. But I definitely had that interest all along.
It's something I've always been fascinated by, is how people discover or realize they have an interest in languages. And because some people, they, despite being in a small town or somewhere where it's not necessarily very popular per se, it's interesting to see how some people just almost like have it as a DNA trait. It's almost maybe not a DNA trait, but something that's in them inherently.
Yeah, I've wondered that, like, just because my family also, like, my family only speaks English. My parents both took French in high school, but don't really remember any of it. My mom can, if she, like, hears French spoken at her, she can kind of pick out a few things and kind of get the general gist of what's happening. And my dad knows maybe, like, a few key phrases in French that he'll, like, try to whip out and, like, impress you with. But, like, that's about all they know. So I, like, wonder what actually got me interested in it, since I didn't really have any exposure to people in my family either, being people who spoke other languages.
Yeah, I've always wondered where it comes from, because if you look at my family, for example, oops, got my pencil. Many people, there we go. Many people are multilingual. So my grandpa speaks English, he speaks Hindi, he speaks Gujarati, speaks decent Swahili. My grandma's kind of similar. A lot of my aunts and uncles speak a certain amount of French. They speak English, speak the Gujarati. Like, people are bilingual, trilingual. Like, it's common enough in my family, but not necessarily because they like languages, but because they just happen to live, because of how they grew up and where they grew up and things like that. And so for me, to have an interest in languages is something that is not necessarily common in the family. And so it's something I've thought about, like, is it a DNA thing? Is it just a random with people that just sort of happens? And I haven't really figured it out, nor have I, heard any compelling reasons given by anyone that I go, oh, that makes sense. Apart from just randomly someone likes it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I wonder, I know they did a study at one point. I watched a video on it that was, they tested a bunch of polyglots and tried to find, like, similarities in them within their brains. So they found that, like, a person who is multilingual, like, who is chosen to be multilingual, wasn't necessarily, like, raised multilingual, but has, like, I think it was only people who have chosen to kind of learn languages, are, like, usually pretty good at musical things, like can play an instrument or can, like, piece out, like, can notice certain notes or things like that. Yeah. They also are typically good at math, which
that doesn't work for me.
Yeah. I think there was some correlation with left-handedness as well, which I also don't, like, I'm right-handed, so it doesn't really mean as much. But it was interesting just because there were a bunch of things where they were saying that these are the correlations between them, and I'm not sure how many are really, I don't know how far they even took the study, and I know as I was watching it, there were a lot where I was like, well, I'm not good at math, and I'm also right-handed, but it is interesting to think about, like, what correlations would be in, like, a population of people that are maybe, like, good at one type of thing or are interested in one type of thing.
Yeah, because it's different than a lot of interests. Like, it's different than, like, if you like football and you love football, you're surrounded by it. Like, maybe your family liked it, so you got in that way. Maybe whatever it is. But language, an interest in language is, I can't think of very many common ways that like people could get into it. Like, it has to be something like I don't know. Like, for me, it was like the I guess you could say the initial match was when I was 15, and I had just come back from an exchange trip in France where I was there for 3 months. Came back, and I remember we were in our French class, and there's a bunch of us that had gone, not a huge number, but 4, 5, 3, 7, small number. And, you know, the teacher goes, oh, how was your trip? Everyone tell us about your trip. And everyone's speaking. And they're telling us everyone's talking about their trip and where they were in France, how it was, because we were in different parts of France. And I'm listening to people speak, and I'm going, huh, that person doesn't sound very French. They're clearly gotten better, but like they've gotten better, but I can still tell they're not French. Oh, that person's similar. Oh, that person's similar. Oh, he sounds really French. Wow, he's really got it. And because for me, I came back speaking super French. Like it was like I had a very good accent. I felt suddenly it was French was super easy. Like, I understood the grammar. Like I came back with a exceptionally high level from the 3 months. And other people came back with high levels, but in my opinion, as a 15-year-old, I thought, I think I'm one of the best ones. And I thought, huh, maybe I'm good at this thing. And then Spanish was offered at the high school. I'd wanted to take Spanish before going on that exchange trip, but I couldn't because when I was in France, that was when the Spanish class was offered. So I taught myself a little bit online, enough to just like write a placement test and skip the first level of Spanish and go to the second one. But it was a BS test. It wasn't anything, you know, it wasn't anything serious. It wasn't like I was super smart. Like I was actually quite behind going into the second class. I think they just let me in because I wanted to go in with my friends, so they just let me in. But, and it's just like over time, I'll just notice that, oh, I picked this up. It just comes natural. Like I like it. And slowly it just sort of happened. But I don't know how, I don't understand where it came from.
It's so interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but.
I don't know either. I feel like for me, it just kind of came out of doing German in middle school, and like then I just kept going with it. It was like I want to.
I think for you, part of it was just you like German, and then I was like, "Hey, you want to learn language with me?" And you were like, "Yeah."
Absolutely.
Interesting. Anyway, let's wrap this up here. We've been going for a little under an hour, so as per usual, guys. So Polyglot Progress, all their social links are in the description below. YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook, they're everywhere. What's your podcast, by the way? I heard you mention that in passing.
Yeah, so it's currently just on our YouTube channel. It's called the Polyglot Progress Podcast. You can find it as a video, but we're working on getting it on Spotify and other platforms right now.
Yeah. Okay. There's one episode on Spotify.
Yeah, there's actually one episode on Spotify if you want. The very beginning.
A quick little recommendation, and I don't know if you looked into it, but have you heard of Anchor?
Yes, that's actually what we're using.
We saw you were using that, and I was like, oh, this is smart. Let's try this. And so that's what we signed up for, and it's really nice.
Yeah, because they I don't even know how they do it, but they get it everywhere. They get it on iTunes, and they get it on Spotify. They get it everywhere for you, essentially.
I've been trying to do it forever, and like I just always had such difficulty, and then I saw you were doing that.
Actually, a few episodes on iTunes from when you like manually went in and put them on iTunes, but it was taking forever.
That was a mistake.
Yeah. So, anyway, well, let's wrap it up there. Thank you again. I think I was gonna say something, I don't remember what it was, so whatever. Thanks for watching, everyone. Matt, Abigail, thank you for being on this. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
And well, everyone, we'll see you later.